Oklahoma's recommended visitation schedule for ages 5 through 17. I'm Tulsa attorney James Worth, and that is the issue that we're addressing here. I've been doing a series of videos related to the advisory guidelines for visitation and the standard visitation schedules. So back in 2004, the Oklahoma legislature passed a law that required the administrative director of courts to come up with recommended visitation guidelines. They call them the advisory guidelines, and included in there are some actual schedules for visitation. However, these are just guidelines. Ultimately, the judge in your case determines what's in the best interest of your child based on wide discretion. But these can be persuasive for arguments, and they can be used for drafting what an appropriate visitation schedule would be. So for all of those schedules going from birth to 5 years of age, there's recommendations that are included in the advisories, certain things to consider as you're deciding what's in the best interest of any given child, but there's no actual schedule recommended for them. There's no actual form documented in the form of a schedule that's part of those advisory guidelines. But starting at age 5, there is. What's interesting about these guidelines, looking at them now, and again, they've been in place since about 2005 is when they came out, even though they were became law to do that in 2004, is that there are not 50-50 schedules on here. 50-50 schedules are very common under Oklahoma law, at least for a temporary hearing. It is pretty much presumed that it's in the best interest of the child to have equal access to both parents. Typically, that can mean a 50-50 schedule. We see week on, week off for older kids. We see a 2-2-3 schedule for younger kids. But in these advisory guidelines, we're dealing primarily with a custodial parent and a non-custodial parent. And there we've got, in these schedules, they've got all kinds of different ones, but they typically revolve around an every other weekend type thing. So for ages 5 through 17, this is what it talks about and recommends. It talks about weekend sharing. That means alternating weekends. And it notes there's two types there. There's limited and expanded. So for limited, you're talking based on this recommendation, Friday at 5 to Sunday at 5. And then for expanded, it's Friday after school to Monday morning. So that way, if you do it that way, then you avoid the visitation exchange because you take them directly from school, return them to school. However, it notes that can be problematic if the secondary custodial and the non-custodial parent is not good at making sure homework and things get done, and it's more difficult to keep track of those things if you have a kid that is struggling in school because it's going to require more communication between the parents under those circumstances. But those are the two, limited and expanded. That's the first time is weekend visitation, and it notes that which one is best going to depend on the age of the child, the parent's work schedule, the ability to pick up the child after school, geographic distances between the parents, and parental responsibility. But it does note the added benefit of a conflict-free exchange if you do the expanded because you're picking up and dropping back off to school. It also notes sometimes it's not just alternating weekends. It could be that it's the first, the third, and the fifth weekend of each month. That's a little more cumbersome schedule to deal with rather than every other weekend. That's only going to result in 2 months a year, I believe, that have 3 weekends instead of 2 weekends. So I would say that's probably not my recommendation, but it does note that is an option under these advisory guidelines. It notes that if one parent's work schedule is such that he does not have weekends off, then the every other weekend is not going to be a good schedule for that parent. You want to do something different. Okay, then it talks about midweek sharing. Okay, so if you've got this every other weekend schedule, sometime you can have one day during the week. Frequently that's Wednesday, doesn't have to be, could be Tuesday, could be Thursday. And it notes, just like on the every other weekend, there's an expanded version and a limited version. Under the limited version in this recommendation, they talk about it being from Wednesday at 5:30 to Wednesday at 8:30. The expanded would be Wednesday after school to Thursday returning back to school. So it notes that sometimes that can be a great opportunity, particularly if there's an event scheduled. Maybe the parent that's getting visitation can take the child to Taekwondo on Wednesday evenings or to church on Wednesday evenings, or maybe that's their one night a week where they sit and have dinner together. So you can kind of work that around the schedules to fit something in that's meaningful. One downside it notes to this plan, it's got it in bold here. Problem with the weekend visitation, it's right there in bold. And it says that's money because once you start doing every other weekend, if you add that additional overnight because you're doing an extended midweek visitation, then you're going over 120 nights per year, which means it starts to affect and reduce the child support obligation if you're above 120. So that is this notes that that's a factor that comes up. However, these advisory guidelines are not about, what's a monetary factor. They're about best interest of the children and recommendations. So they don't get into that further. So other things you want to look at for visitation schedule 5 to 17 as part of these advisory guidelines is holidays. And it recommends in all of these schedules alternating holidays. So one parent gets it one year, the next parent, that parent gets it. One parent gets this holiday, the next holiday goes to the other parent. So it alternates years and alternates holidays each year. Previously, prior to these coming out, there was a lot of different schedules that determined what holidays were. There wasn't an agreement statewide on what is a holiday, what isn't, when does it start, when does it end. And after this, at least we have recommendations on holiday schedules, and there's template ones that are in the guidelines. But still, the judge ultimately in each case determines what is appropriate. And usually the parties agree to it and the judge approves it. But if not, then the judge makes that determination. So these guidelines are not mandatory. They are in fact just guidelines and recommendations. Summer break, obviously something else that you fit in. And that notes these schedules have terms for that. Typically, the non-custodial parent may get 2 weeks in June, 2 weeks in July. There's extended versions of that as well. For midterm breaks, you want to include that in, whether it's a fall break or a spring break. Those can go to the non-custodial parent as well. Transportation, it's got recommendations in there on who's handling transportation. If there's a lot of costs associated with that, then that may go to one parent or the other as far as who's footing the bills for those costs. As far as who's picking up, are they meeting at a third location? Is one party picking up? Is the other party dropping off? That could be a determination that's made in those schedules as well. Another one goes back kind of to holidays is, do you put the child's birthday as being the holiday that alternates? And a lot of schedules it does, and the recommendations here, that sometimes is the case. Another thing that's got to be looked into is if there's siblings that you want to kind of coordinate visitation with, you want to look into and coordinate that. So those are the various factors that fall into all of these different schedules. And based on whether you've got every other weekend, limited or extended, whether you're doing visitation during the week, not at all, or non-overnight, the limited, or the overnight, the extended, they've got schedules for all of those different things. But they're just guidelines, and it may be different, from one household to the next. The child's school schedule, the parents' work schedules, those are all going to factor in. So no one schedule is going to work for everyone. But these are standards that you can look at and you can build from and edit from to try to come up with recommendations on what you want to see if the court will adopt that for you. But if you're dealing with a circumstance where you're going to court in Oklahoma for custody or visitation, you're going to want to not just review videos on YouTube, but also review these advisory guidelines and also talk to an attorney privately and confidentially to receive legal advice. Because like I said, these guidelines are strange in the fact that there aren't any 50-50 schedules in here, and 50-50 schedules are not all that uncommon. Whether that's week on, week off, or a 2-2-3 schedule, they're common and they're not in here. So this is not the end all be all, but it is a part of the puzzle. So you might check it out, but do talk to an attorney privately and confidentially. If you want to get that scheduled with an attorney at my office, go online to makelaweasy.com.